everybody. As many of you may know, I just returned from a little vacation down to Texas, specifically San Antonio, Texas. And when you go down to San Antonio, you have to see the most famous historical landmark there, which is the Alamo. And it's not huge, it's a little building with a little courtyard around it, but I don't know, pretty cool overall. Even though you kind of wonder why these guys just stayed and got killed, but hey, I mean, I'd ran like a coward, but I am a coward, so it's cool. And it really got me to thinking, why do we celebrate the Alamo in such a way? Why is it so important in history? I mean, it's a defeat, right? 200 Texans that were there were pretty much slaughtered by the Mexican army. And weren't technically any Americans there, they were Texans, but you know, they're sort of by proxy Americans. But so why is this landmark so famous? Well, I think there are two really important factors to consider. One is that in Western culture, in Western thought, we have an ethic of self-sacrifice. Giving up your life is a big deal in Western culture, and these 200 defenders gave up their life for their cause. Fought down to the last man. Everybody was killed. And they fought. They actually, physically made the effort despite the overwhelming odds. You take another battle in the Texas War for Independence, Goliad. It took place just a couple weeks after the Alamo. In that battle, after everybody in the Alamo was killed, they surrendered. They attempted to surrender because they didn't want to die. And they were all killed. They were executed as pirates, as Santa Anna put it. And so we don't celebrate Goliad in the same way because they didn't fight down to the last man. They really didn't sacrifice themselves. They were just murdered. So it's a little less glorifying than the Alamo, which is this real example of self-sacrifice. And on top of that, on top of all these things, the Texans win the war. Yes, the third battle, there's only actually 3 battles in the Texas War for Independence. San Jacinto, Sam Houston and his forces turned around on Santa Anna's larger force and defeated it at San Jacinto, captured Santa Anna, forced him to sign a treaty that said Texas is now independent, and boom, the Texans win the war. They're independent, and they're an independent country for about 8 years till the Americans annex it and becomes part of the United States. So that's the deal with the Alamo. I mean, it's a big deal because people fought and died there, and they fought for a cause. Self-sacrifice and a war that was won really make the Alamo a big deal in history. It makes it important in history. It makes it something that's glorified in history. It gets an elevated position because everybody wants to be that kind of hero in a way in some historical context. Now, of course, there's whitewashing, there's glorification, there's lots of things that are inaccurate about it, but overall, the Alamo just kind of is what it is. And honestly, there's not too much more to say about it. Well, it did appear a couple times in popular culture, well, more than a couple times, but famously in 2 films. So why don't I just go ahead and talk about the 2 films? Wait! It's bad enough that this history stuff is Shanghai my channel, but now you're going to steal Western movies from me? Yeah, that's cool. Let's just talk about the 2 movies together. Really? Okay. Well, of course we're going to do it together. I mean, clearly I edited that shot in, so clearly we're going to do this as one. I mean, why would I bother editing myself in another shot in if I wasn't going to do it as 2 different people? Stop that! Stop that right now! Let's not get meta again. We just did that video. Okay, no more meta. I promise. I'll try to avoid that from now on. You know what? Why don't you, Big Black Hat Man, start off by describing the 1960 film?
The Alamo, filling the giant theater screen with spectacular adventure, filmed on a scale unequaled in motion picture history, recreating the 13 glorious days of the siege history will never forget, and you will always remember the Alamo.
In 1960, John Wayne released his directorial debut, The Alamo, a big, epic 3-hour film. Well, nearly 3 hours. It kind of feels like 3 hours. It's a very long movie. This film sort of represents the apex of John Wayne, right? He took all he knew from John Ford and Howard Hawks and all he knew about directing and put it into one nearly 3-hour film. Yeah, that's kind of the big highlights of this film. It's long. But here's the thing about the Alamo. Most people don't realize this because it was a critical failure. It was actually a huge financial success. It was the highest grossing film of John Wayne's career. In fact, it's not even close. This was easily his highest grossing film. So in spite of the fact that a lot of critics don't like it, and it's still seen to this day as kind of a failure in his directorial debut, that he wasn't really ever considered a good director because of it, it made a lot of money. Now, you can see in the film his influences, and clearly he was taking from a little from here, a little from there, and everything he knew, and you end up with a lot of speeches about republic and freedom and revolution and the necessity of violence. And they kind of go on and on and on. But luckily the climax is good. Yeah, the climax has a lot of really good action. There are some really beautifully shot scenes. There's some go back a distance, very John Ford-esque, beautiful canvas-like scenes throughout the film. And it's got some good characters and some decent acting. I mean, even Richard Widmark, who I'm not a fan of, does a decent job in this film portraying Jim Bowie. So yeah, I mean, overall the film's got its huge upsides, it's got its little downsides, and it's almost 3 hours long. Really not too much more to say about it. I mean, I guess you could add something about the history of the film.
I hate to say anything good about that long-winded jackanapes, but he does know the short way to start a war.
Well, also, historically, this film's not all that good. It's not a good piece of history. It really whitewashes the history. It ignores the Tejano defenders, you know, those who we consider Mexican, who sided with the Texans in independence, and they weren't really a big part of the battle. There were actually several women and children in the Alamo, and none of that's there. That's all pushed to the side for the great male defenders. It's a glorification, this film. It's a whitewashing. It's a little disturbing for a historian, realizing how inaccurate they are with some things. I mean, one of the biggest things is Jim Bowie, right? I mean, in reality, he had an STD. He's laid up in bed. He's dying. He's definitely not fighting. And in this film, he fights a lot. Not possible. I mean, there's some rumor that from his own bedside he fired a gun, maybe through his knife. But he's laid up. He's not doing much of anything. He just pretty much died in his bed, regardless of what he actually did from that bed. Also, the battle is historically wrong, too, where Crockett dies, how they order people to die. All those things are kind of wrong. And the battle, it was a 13-day siege with the Mexicans sort of pressing in on the Alamo before attacking. And the actual attack actually takes like less than half an hour. It's very short, like 10, 15 minutes is all of the battle lasted. And in this movie, it seems to drag on for a little while, and they really get that wrong, too. So, yeah, no women and children, no Tejanos, reenactors in the battle. Not historically a very good film. This is a glorification film. It's a whitewashing film. It's the kind of thing that historians really frown on. And I can see why it's not good from that standpoint. So, but historical inaccuracy of this film aside, Big Black Hat Man, why don't you go ahead and describe the 2004 film for us?
I'd like to ask each of you what it is you value so highly that you are willing to fight and possibly die for.
It is my conviction that holding this fort is the key to defending our colonies. As goes the Alamo, so goes Texas.
When I return, we'll get a home of our own. I promise.
Davy Crockett, the Lion of the West.
Well, in 2004, John Lee Hancock released his version of the Alamo, and it is kind of the same movie, but not really. It's also very long, like the first movie, not quite as long, but still long. And it's got little differences here and there, little people. Of course, all the actors are different, and it's shot a little bit different. But overall, it's kind of the same movie. But one of the biggest differences is they actually have the Battle of San Jacinto in this film. Yeah, you get Dennis Quaid playing Sam Houston and actually fighting and defeating Santa Anna. They just talk about it in the first movie, a little text scroll or something like that. And we had Richard Boone playing Sam Houston there, though, so that's nice of Sam Houston playing Richard Boone. But Dennis Quaid's good, too. So this film is, see, let me remember something about this movie. This movie's hard to remember. Really, I mean, there's some lines here and there, but there's nothing really. All the performances are good, the directing's good, the scenes are good, the shots are good. Everything's fine. It's just not memorable. It's just hard to glom on to anything to remember about this film. It's the Alamo. It is just exactly what you promises to be through the title. It's not as long. It's not 3 hours. It's only like 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's still kind of long. I don't know. Tell us about the history of the film.
For today, remember the Alamo!
John Lee Hancock's 2004 film is a much more historically accurate film. It really worked hard. It worked with the actual foundation that runs the Alamo to this day. It worked with historians. It worked to make a historically accurate film. Naturally, some details have been lost to history. I mean, you can't have every little conversation, every little thing that happened, but they make the effort. They make the effort to make it seem like it might have actually been. Really, it's a largely humanizing piece, giving the characters a lot to say and think about and do in 13 days, as they basically stand off and no real fighting takes place. That's what this film is about in many ways, is the history and the people involved in the history. It's a great piece from a historian's standpoint. It really works hard to make. I mean, you can nitpick details, and almost any film is like that, no matter how historically accurate you get. There's always going to be a little Hollywood license. There's going to be a little dramatization. And even in the Battle of San Jacinto, they sort of get some things wrong about how Santa Anna was found and things. But nothing is hugely out of place in this film, and it's a very historically accurate film. It could almost serve in a classroom as a history. Now, that being said, Big Black Hat Man, why don't you tell us which film you liked better? John Wayne! Wait, why did I do that? I'm not sure why I did it, but regardless, yeah, I liked the 1960 film better. I mean, none of these are a great movie. Good is the best adjective you could describe with either of these films. Competent. A lot of heart and soul was put into both movies. Clearly, John Wayne and John Lee Hancock really cared about their subject matter. They were making a lot of effort, and the actors were making a lot of effort, but the problem is it's a 13-day siege followed by a short battle. So there's a lot of sitting around staring at each other and talking. That's it. Almost nothing happens. I give the second film credit for including San Jacinto to sort of amp up the action a little bit, to give a little bit more to the film. But man, for the most part, it's just sitting around talking. And with Wayne, you get really flowery speeches about Republic. In Hancock's film, you get lots of personal little stories. I mean, honestly, they're not... I can't remember. I know Davy Crockett talks about being David Crockett and running away at one point, but I don't remember what anybody talked about in the film. It's just... Neither film is great, but both were made with a lot of heart and effort and soul. But overall, the 1960 film is much more memorable, with its big, grand shots, with its more grand message, with its just being bigger and more epic. The second film, in its historical pursuit, becomes kind of small. Maybe reality is a little bit smaller than we want it to be. And so the 1960 film is ultimately bigger, better, more epic, and more memorable. I remember stuff that happened in the 1960 film. I have a hard time remembering stuff that happened in the 2004 film. So ultimately, even though neither film is great, and both films are watchable, I have to pick the 1960 film. The 2004 film is just too forgettable. So that's all I have to say about that. Gee, I wonder what the historian, the one who likes historical accuracy, is going to pick for his favorite film. So why don't you just go ahead and tell us why you like the 2004 film better, Mr. Historian? Well, I really like both films. Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say you like both? I didn't catch that. Repeat that for me. Well, that's right. I like both movies. I mean, the 2004 film is definitely good history. It's something you can learn from. It's something you can take from. It's something that you can watch and understand history. It's a good learning tool. Honestly, it feels like a dramatization of something that actually happened. And so, yeah, the 2004 film is a good history film, and one that I encourage people to watch who want to know the actual history of the Alamo. Now, the 1960 film is not good history. But that doesn't mean we can't learn things from it. It represents something. It represents something that we want to have. People want to glorify events in a lot of instances. We want to push things up. We want to make things bigger than they were. We want the grand, patriotic concept. And that is all that the 1960 film is. It represents a part of culture, American culture, that to understand you have to know about. And if you don't know about it, it's hard to criticize or defend it. You don't understand it if you don't know what it is. And the 1960 film represents so much of that. The Alamo is a decent film, a 1960 John Wayne film. It's clearly made with a lot of care, time, and effort. And so it gives us something. It gives us something to understand. Now, historically, no, I can't encourage you to take much historically from it. But on the other hand, when you're listening to all the flowery speeches in the film, all the talk of freedom and republic and all those sorts of things, there's something to be learned there. There's something to be understood there. There's something to know about glorification, whether you like or dislike it or however you see in between. is something to be learned from that. I like both films. They both provide learning opportunities about how people felt in 1960 about the Alamo, how people felt in 2004 about the Alamo, and how the people who made those films feel about it. Film doesn't always have to represent anything historically accurate right down to the numbers. That's almost impossible to do. Oftentimes film is more a reflection of the culture at the time the film was made and the people who made it. And we should all try to understand that. That being said, I like the 1960 Alamo. It really gives an image of what the conservative mind was in 1960, John Wayne specifically. And Wayne represented a lot of that in that era. So, both films had their upside. I really enjoyed both films. Neither one's great, but they're both very watchable and clearly made with a lot of time, effort, and heart. Wow, this was actually kind of fun. I enjoy this. Big Black Hat Man back in action. Yeah. Hey, why don't we do this again next week? No, I don't think so. I just don't think I'll have this much time for production and editing next week, so I don't think we can do this kind of episode again then. Stop eating metal! Stupid metal! I'm just gonna leave. Metal. Well, thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time, and I hope you enjoyed a little bit of historical perspective.